practical threat that the Army was experiencing, that soldiers were getting killed because of, and they didn't have the most modern enabling capability to defeat that threat or to detect that threat even from that standpoint.
New ways to prosecute the fight. What's a little bit different about the conflicts we've been in for the last 10 years in counterinsurgency is the targets are different. If you look at what we look for in high intensity conflict, we look for foreign army formations of our enemies, and the indications and warnings are very different from what you look for in a counterinsurgency.
The reason for the PEO structure to be implemented the way it was is to provide intensive management for programs, for the acquisition programs.
There are a number of things you can go look for that are very distinct. When you get into the counterinsurgency fight, it's a different look. You're looking, first of all, to understand the environment. So you have to collect a lot of information, do persistent surveillance over an area to figure out what the pattern of life is. And then you go look for the anomalies, the things that are different, because that's where you'll find the bad actors on the counterinsurgency battlefield.
So the time of UAVs had come, and it was, I happened to visit the Paris Air Show in the spring before the competition. 38 UAVs on displays from about 15 different countries.
So beefing up the Mars capability, and then really turning profit completely around.
For our use, because Hunter transferred to us, we had the O&M responsibility for all the fights Hunter did in Kosovo and Bosnia. Hunter and Predator teamed, and we put a communications relay on the Hunter, and the Predator went forward over the area and took photographs. So it was a good use of UAVs.
Put sensor coverage on it and see what we've got. And that's what Odin did over time, taking multiple sensors of different types, determine normal, then when something abnormal happened, zoom in on it with different kinds of sensors to determine what it is and whether we needed to take action against that.
Hostile fire on rotary wing and fixed wing aircraft, in my experience, was the second most lethal weapon of choice against U.S. Army soldiers and against joint forces, only surpassed by the use of IEDs that became so prevalent.
To find the insurgents on the battlefields of Iraq, to find the guy planning the IED, more importantly, to follow that chain back to who was funding it, where were the IEDs being built. Odin enabled that in Iraq and was such a great success that it got exported to Afghanistan.
Over the last 30 years, you can definitely say about the organization is its pride. And you can talk about the innovation and the technical excellence of each person that's in this organization. Whether you're military, whether you're Department of the Army, civilian, or our support contractors that we equally treat as part of this family. But it is clear they thrive on adaptability, tough problems. It is that personal pride and commitment to ensure what they deliver makes a difference, and it does. Everything we do is ultimately about making sure that our military doesn't have a fair fight, it's an unfair, and that we make sure they get everything necessary to protect their members that are deployed or in contact, and ultimately to make sure that they return home to their families.
Acquisition is a complete team sport. From the people that are providing our admin support to the people making the decisions on programs, we all have to work together to get things done. And it's an incredibly complex system and a difficult system to work through because it has so many checks and balances. But we've done amazing things, particularly in the last 10 years since 9/11.
Building a team that understood how to bring rigor and structure to the acquisition process, how to normalize things across PMs that resided in different locations, and at the same time have the insights on how to tailor programs and how to improvise as necessary so that you could bring the programs to the warfighters on time and on budget.
At understanding how to work within the system, how to change the system, how to make the right things happen. So you see that we put tremendous amounts of equipment on the battlefield that have saved soldiers' lives and enabled them to do their job better.
There is no finer organization in the Army than this PEO. It's incredible when you look at this, probably the most complicated portfolio out of 12 PEOs in the Army. And again, what I see, the constant, which is the internal pride, the technical excellence, the adaptability, and the rapidness that our folks, with their industry partners and all the stakeholders and users, how fast they solve the tough problem.
So we had plans to deal with, mines or IEDs, if you will, under vehicles and stuff, but not roadside, not in bunkers and things like that.
But there was a new requirement when Scuds became part of the target, because the Scuds have a different profile. They shoot straight up for a long distance, and Firefinder would reject things of that nature because they didn't meet the profile. So we had to modify the software in order to be able to pick up the Scuds.
So we've had a number of new programs. The Multi-Function Electronic Warfare MFU program is one of 3 programs. First was the Electronic Warfare Program Management Tool, the Spectrum Management Tool. MFU is the Offensive Electronic Warfare, and DEA, Defensive Electronic Attack, is in the process. The requirements document will come out and we'll start that program. So it's a revitalization, if you will, of the entire electronic warfare program.
Soldiers were traveling down a road and they were in harm's way, and our crew devices blocked the initiation of an IED that they discovered when they had already were on top of it or had gone past it. The crew device kept it from initiating, and they were able to go disarm the device and keep it from harming any of our soldiers. We get stories about the insurgents identified by our various sensors that enable our soldiers to react before the enemy and prevent them from harming more of our soldiers.
Gee, I remember seeing a video of a terrorist that had tried to detonate a IED, and there was a PTDS in the air, and it caught this guy and followed him, and they stayed on him. He was on a motorcycle, and they followed him into a built-up area. And shortly after that, the MRAP showed up and encircled them and took all those guys out. And that was all a function of having PTDS on station and able to support that kind of a mission.
We had a couple of programs that made some big transitions. We had something called the IEW Common Sensor. It just could not get technically solving all of its problems. So we canceled that and replaced it with what is now the Prophet program.
A more conventional program that would enable us to get to a common fleet or a pure fleet solution, ultimately called Duke, Crew Duke program, which we were successful in. And we were successful in accelerating delivery of that program. When we looked at what industry was prepared to sign up and what we actually accomplished, we accelerated delivery by in excess of 4 years.
Talked to a number of soldiers who said, I'm here today because of one of your systems, the crew systems, the situational awareness systems we put out there.
Previous unmanned aerial vehicle programs were all somewhat successful but not good. And the Department of Defense established a joint program office for UAVs at Pax River, Maryland with the Navy. And they had an Army presence there. I was able to sign an agreement with Admiral Chenevey, that PEO, to separate the Army effort from his Navy effort. He wanted a vertical takeoff and landing off of a ship, and we wanted a short takeoff and landing from a field that would be much, much cheaper aircraft. Eventually we got the Hunter program transferred from that Navy office, and then we competed and awarded the Shadow 200 program.
Signal warfare then grew on to be electronic warfare. Noted as an invention of the year. Just a tremendous success story in saving and protecting soldiers' lives. Got acknowledgement from the 4-star commander in Iraq of how rapidly we were able to do that.
personally very satisfied to come to work and look at the work that this PEO does to put out systems that enable our soldiers to do a better job on the battlefield, to protect them on the battlefield, and to meet our national objectives. And I love the team that I work with because they're dedicated to doing the same thing, and they understand just how important the equipment we put out there is.
When you look at the modernization priorities from the Chief of Staff of the Army, we actually have 4 of the top 10 major priorities, and that includes aircraft protection, maximum protection to our air crews. We provide the survivability equipment, the ability to detect, declare, and counter. And all of that is so critical in today's highly complex and threat-driven environment. And the threat picture continues to change. That equally applies in every mission area of this PEO. And that's what we're trying to get after, is to make sure whether it's a forward operating base that has our integrated base defense and our capabilities to provide force protection, or the capabilities to make sure that we can head off an IED incident, or to help them make sure that we can find, track high value targets, or just find, track, and ultimately make sure that operational commander on the ground has everything they need from an ISR perspective to successfully execute their mission.
Talked to a number of soldiers who said, I'm here today because of one of your systems, the crew systems, the situational awareness systems we put out there.
Yeah, Betsy was one of those systems that we really needed at that time for providing the security for the forward operation bases.
EMARS is the Enhanced Medium Altitude Reconnaissance and Surveillance System. It's a smart intelligence aircraft. And so we converted a number of those quick reaction programs. We upgraded to a 350 aircraft. And it brings the most advanced signals and different intelligence capabilities to the intelligence community.
So what makes us different is we touch a lot of organizations in direct support, and the capabilities, the systems, the equipment we have to bring to bear. And it's all about the current fight right now. So yes, it's about generating long-term capabilities through cooperative, collaborative teamwork across the enterprise, whether it's from the S&T community all the way to the industry partners that have to help us solve the problem and deliver now.
To respond to urgent needs, things that once the commanders got on the battlefield said, you know, we need this kind of capability, we need it quickly, and don't underestimate the value of speed. So that was kind of the environment. You know, it was, you had operation in Iraq going on at the same time, Afghanistan. You know, it was very, I would say, challenging.
You know, 30+% of my funds was actually base budget that I could rely on over a period of time. Other contingency funds you fundamentally competed for on an almost annual basis, and they were all in support of what we called quick reaction capabilities, where it was apparent warfighters did not have the enablers they needed to be successful and prosecute the threat in enduring freedom and Iraqi freedom from that standpoint. Dramatic change in focus and priorities.
The Army needs something maybe different than the other services, because the ground force needs a lot of coverage over the sensor area for long periods of time, and that we have to do it at a price people can afford.
Prophet was a signals intelligence collection device, and the special ops people had something called the PRD-13. It was kind of a man-portable thing with somewhat limited range and somewhat limited accuracy. So what we did with this was put it on in a vehicle and mount a mast on the vehicle so that we could get the antenna up higher, get longer range to identify it, and then Prophet went through a couple of enhancements.
The improvisation probably that was most exciting and had the longest lasting effect was something that was called shortstop. And the way that happened was I was sitting in my office at Vint Hill and received a call from General Schwarzkopf's scientific advisor, a guy named Herb Rubright, who asked me what I was doing to provide protection for the light-skinned forces that were deployed from the 82nd Airborne Division against the 100,000 plus 152 rounds that Saddam had equipped with proximity fuses, which would explode the warhead just above the ground and scatter the shrapnel through the forces. And I said, nothing that I know of, no one's given me a requirement. And he said, well, you got one now, General Schwarzkopf wants this. And I said, tell him I got it and I'll move out.
Dramatic change from the PEO. 6 years from that point forward on what I call a wartime footing. My metrics, if you will, is in excess of 60% of my annual budget was what we call operational contingency funds.
Because along with that, you had your programs that you had to keep focused on and moving forward, but that QRC was almost, it wasn't, I don't want to call it an additional duty, but it's not like the PMs were all resourced to do those things. So as you brought those missions in, it was tough to handle.
And I went to my bosses in the Pentagon and said, hey, I got this telephone call. You have told me that PEOs should solve their own problems and use their authorities. So unless you tell me no, I'm going to reprogram up to $10 million to execute this task. Well, a couple of days later, the Comptroller of the Army, Lieutenant General McCall, got me on the telephone and told me that I was on a path to Leavenworth, and he said, I mean the jail, not the school, for misappropriation of funds. And so we had a little dialogue, and I told him what I was doing, and I said, I think your background is infantry, and this requirement and finding a solution for it will probably resonate with you. And he said, we'll see, I'll call you back. And the next day he called and said, I want to know how much more money you need, if any. And so that gave us the opportunity to deploy a capability that provided protection against our forces.
Something that you worked on finally get fielded like that. The other thing that, of course, is gratifying is to see that something like that has continued, and with additional enhancements it becomes more accurate and more usable by the troops.
In the end, what I can tell you is this organization thrives on adaptability and its ability to solve relevant, tough problems. And that's the excellence into the corporate people. But again, people and leadership have to come together in different ways, in faster ways. And it is about organizational adaptability. But we can't do it without first our folks, and they have to be enabled, empowered, and also skilled. But we also have academia, we have our S&T partners, our science and technology partners, we have industry. Everything we do ultimately revolves around a procurement action that involves an industry partner. But at the same time, this is an environment where there's personal and professional accountability demanded by all.
The things that we do are exactly what our country needs for the future. What America never wants to do is send our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines into a fair fight. We want it to be unfair, so nobody wants to take us on. And one of the huge advantages that we have over our adversaries is the situational understanding we have.
Believed that we needed to become more effective and efficient and aligned with both our strategic customers. Primarily those are the centers of excellence like the Intelligence Center of Excellence in Fort Huachuca, or at that time the Signal Center, which was down at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And also with the science and technology community. CERDEC is the main organization within RDECOM that supports us, but because of our diverse portfolio, we work with many of the other organizations. And I wanted to get a better alignment of a program manager to a customer to an S&T environment so that he could be more efficient in his operations.
Knowing what's out there, and we get that from systems like the ISR systems this PEO puts out there. So I'm tremendously proud to work with a team as dedicated as they are that are doing absolutely the things our country needs.
So it is all about getting out in front of proliferation, technology diffusion, and the threats that we're facing in such an unpredictable and uncertain world. It is about delivering now, and that's what the mission focuses on, making sure that we have open, adaptable programs to truly outpace the threat. What's amazing when you look back, just from 3 decades ago, and the systems, the platforms, and the capabilities back from the 1980s to where we are in the 21st century, dealing with the complex threats of today's environment. We've also moved from an analog age into a highly complex, software-intensive digital environment. In all of our platforms, we touch ground, air, cyberspace, and space.